Tim, it's a huge leap of faith to leave Blizzard and move on to start your own studio, Frost Giant. What was the main driving force behind that decision?
Probably like most founders by definition are
Tim Morten,
one of the production leaders behind Blizzard's StarCraft II.
now leads Frost Giant Studios as CEO and production director.
having had a chance to work on that Command & Conquer title, having had a chance to work on StarCraft. Part of that blessing of having that deep perspective was also a handicap. We really felt like we had to do everything that the previous games had done. And the product did not succeed. Our first game, it just didn't find an audience.
So what was it like shifting from such a big team infrastructure to more the scrappy startup mode?
Losing the benefit of all of the support departments. I mean, Blizzard had a cinematics team, QA team, a BattleNet team, had analytics and player insights and marketing, publish it. Just the number of support departments that are there is massive, and it really requires a lot of conscious effort to replace those.
Back in 2019, it was 8,000 games released, and now it's over 20,000 per year, and just oversupply is really at an escalating rate.
I think just for any industry, when you have oversupply, it tends to have a negative impact on the producer, in this case, the developer, in terms of how to navigate that there is a move toward.
Tim, welcome to Founders and Empanadas. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
We got the empanada delivery just in time. Coming through the hills of Malibu. Let's see what flavor you got.
I see the individually wrapped bags, so three sounds good. There are 3 empanadas here. Thank you for that.
Looks like it's got a little empanada tattoo on it. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, here I'll lit up pre-marketing for this place, I guess.
Very cool. Okay, they got the marketing.
There's a beef, a chicken, and a Nutella, so I'm very excited.
Love it. All right, cheers. Let's dig in.
Cheers. All right.
How is it?
That's the chicken. It's good. What are you eating on your side?
I've got this is round 2 of Founders and Empanadas recording today. So they're a little bit cold, a couple hours old, but they still work.
Nice. That's commitment. I appreciate it.
Amazing. Well, Tim, you just want to first start off by saying how grateful I am to you for your work on StarCraft II. I'm a lifelong Blizzard fan myself, and spent many hours in Zerg campaigns. So thanks for all the great work you did, and really excited to dive into more about what you're building at Frost Giant now.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was really fortunate to join StarCraft II after the product had already launched and get to kind of participate in releasing additional content and taking free play and doing other stuff. But kind of like you, I started out as just a big fan of the game. So I'm always very mindful that there's this great team that actually created it that brought me in.
Absolutely. And look, it's a huge leap of faith to leave Blizzard and move on to start your own studio, Frost Giant. What was the main driving force behind that decision? And maybe was there a moment where you thought that, if another epic RTS is going to happen, that you're the one to do it yourself?
Probably like most founders, the thing that motivates you to create a startup is agency, that there are constraints that you have inside another company that are removed as you go off to start your own thing. And in this case, the constraint was that the kind of game that I was passionate about working on, another real-time strategy game, just wasn't possible to build at that point in time at Blizzard, because some of the other games that were coming at that point, Diablo 4 was in production and Overwatch 2 were the main priorities for the company. And that's correct for the company. Those games are great games and deserve the attention that they got. But for me, being so passionate about this genre, I set out to see if I could find the necessary backing to do it outside.
And I'd like to spend some time just talking about the state of the game industry in 2026. There's You've described this yourself. Just back in 2019, it was 8,000 games released, and now it's over 20,000 per year. And just the amount of competition is, and just oversupply is really at an escalating rate. So I'd love to just learn a little bit more about how you stand out as a game studio and among the sea of other indie studios, and any tips you would give to other founders that are earlier in their stage about just how to differentiate their game studio.
I think an accelerating phenomenon in games that the number of titles releasing each year is just steadily going up. And it is just from a independent of games as an industry. I think just for any industry, when you have oversupply, it tends to have a negative impact on the producer, in this case, the developer of games. So, some of those negative impacts are the average success, like, not the breakouts, because it's still a big market. So if you really have a breakout, that can go huge. But the average success, like a game that does a solid like 80% review score, used to be the case that you could count on those games recouping. Now, today, because the market is so crowded, there are many games that are solid games that simply don't recoup because it's so crowded out there. And so I think for many content creators, it's a more risky prospect because things are so crowded. Like there's just too much content. There's an oversupply, and the average budget that's available from third-party financing, whether that's from a venture capital fund or from a publisher, goes down. It's just if you can't be confident in recoups, you got to spend less, and so everybody kind of gets compressed now into the smaller budget part of the market, which just further reduces differentiation. So it is a very challenging time in terms of how to navigate that. The things that I see happening out there in the game industry, for one thing, there is a move towards more globalization. So definitely people are taking advantage of lower labor cost areas to bring costs down. There's also starting to be some efficiencies from the use of AI. So that is becoming more widespread as we speak in the game industry. And just the scope of games that are getting built is changing. I think with budgets going down, what you build has to be more modest in scope.
I'd like to double click on that. A lot of New York's audience, they're interested in global staffing and hearing about which emerging countries are best for finding talent. On your end, for the game development side, I'd love to learn a little bit more about how your team is distributed and, yeah, any pockets of the world where you found amazing talent for your team.
Yeah, we were impacted by the pandemic, obviously. So when we started the company, the pandemic was just like exploding, and so we did have to start virtual, which, like so many other companies, opened the door to working with folks in different parts of the world. And for us, we really did have people scattered all over the place. We were fortunate to get a couple of experienced developers in Poland. So that was a particular win for us. We had one person working from China, we had a person working from Egypt, a person working from Australia, a person working from South Africa. Like we had people all over the world. So that it really did give us access to a broader talent pool, and that was a positive thing to come out of it for sure.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, COVID kind of killed the zip code for most companies, and it's not much different working with someone from New York as it is from someone from Australia, for example.
Yeah, I think that time zone coordination still is a little bit of a challenge. So we definitely, I think for people to feel uh, the same kind of connectivity that you get in an office is pretty impossible in that scenario. But there are things that we can do to mitigate that, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, just as you've built your team across so many different time zones, are there any best practices you've come across for keeping the culture of the company strong and making people feel connected, even though they're in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I don't think we had a perfect solve, but there were a couple of touch points during the course of the week that brought everybody together. We would do one meeting at the beginning of the week that just talked about what everybody was going to set out to accomplish during the week, and of course, as the team grew, had to do that more on a departmental level rather than an individual level. But I think it was helpful for everybody just to understand the goals so that as much as possible we all row in the same direction. Then at the end of our kind of work intervals, which for the game industry, many of us use agile methodology, so we call those sprints. But the end of sprints for us, the whole team would get together and do a show and tell, and people would just show off the work that they accomplished during that period. And that one, unlike the objectives, that's kind of dry because everybody's just talking about the work that they're going to do. Showing off the work that's actually been done is a really exciting thing on a game because there's new features coming, there's new gameplay, new units, whatever. It's a time that generally makes everybody feel excited about what we're working on. So I think that was one of my favorite meetings, and because of the distributed team, it was just a moment for everybody to have a shared experience.
Yeah, that's great, especially just for context sharing on like what each different department is working on and getting people visibility across the whole company. Um, I'm curious on sprint cycles of your team internally. Have you seen that, with AI and code assist tools, you've changed the cadence of your internal sprints, or how has that changed just the velocity of your development time?
Yeah, the truth is, during the development of our last game, AI was really just up and coming, so it didn't have as much impact. The next game we work on, I expect AI will have more impact. I don't think we'll change our sprint intervals. There's just kind of a sweet spot of allowing enough time for sprint planning, enough time for significant progress to be made, and then on the other end, sprint reviews and retrospectives. So, um, but I hope that the velocity is what goes up, like the amount of work that gets accomplished in each sprint. That would be a great outcome.
Yeah, it's a couple of the partners that we work with, they've had to like really rethink just their whole agile methodology. It's no longer kind of relevant to 2016, 2026 with the just how fast development times can be now.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think for games, because we're not just code. There's a lot of design iteration in particular, also our asset content creation, and where code is definitely accelerated. Art is getting accelerated. Like from a 3D perspective, the pipelines aren't quite there yet for games, but there are a lot of people working on that. Like certainly this year, I expect that to change. But design is an area where it's still very human because we're making games for humans. So there's just that feedback loop that has to happen.
And Tim, I'd love to do a little empanada intermission just to kind of take a step back. And really, you have a fascinating career. And I love if you could just share with the audience kind of what you pulled from, working on Command and Conquer at EA and what you pulled from Blizzard and just how that really influenced what you're building at Frost Giant. And yeah, any stories you can share, fun stories from along the way in your career.
Yeah, totally. I think you know even taking a step back from games, anybody who goes deep within a space gets a perspective on uh, what's important, I guess, and what maybe is less important as products evolve. And so I think for me, having had a chance to work on that Command and Conquer title, having had a chance to work on StarCraft for Frost Giant and for the game that we just released, the formula, like the components that we decided were important, was really informed by that experience. And I think if we were just coming into it anew, we wouldn't have had that perspective. That said, the product did not succeed. Our first game, it just didn't find an audience. And I think part of that blessing of having that deep perspective was also a handicap in that we really felt like we had to do everything that the previous games had done. And, there certainly were improvements and new ideas that we had, but just hitting that scope of existing products is a huge bar. StarCraft as a game had, at the time I left Blizzard, 18 years of development behind it, with all the resources and budget that a big company can put on a project. As an indie studio, even though we had 4 years to our early access launch, sort of 5 years to our full launch, fraction of the time, fraction of the budget. And, because we had worked on the product that we were trying to create a successor to, we felt like we kind of already knew how to do a lot of the implementation, that we could do it faster. And we did do a lot faster, but still, 4 years versus 18 years, indie team and smaller budget versus the internal budget that a big company has. It's hard to get to that starting point that players expect to already be there. And so I think we were definitely too ambitious in terms of what we wanted to accomplish out of the gate, and also set expectations too high because we really thought we could accomplish that. So, so much benefit from having had those past experiences, but also a little bit of a handicap for us in maybe underestimating what it took to just get to the starting point that the existing prior games had established.
That's a great point, and I'm curious just what you plan to do differently to reduce scope, and maybe what are the aspects of the huge scope AAA games that don't necessarily impact the player experience that much, in your opinion, that can and potentially should be cut?
Yeah, great question. So, in terms of what we're doing at this point, the product kind of did what it's going to do in terms of audience impression, which unfortunately wasn't the scale of success that we hoped for. So we are continuing to improve and iterate. There's a group of staff that are just really passionate about continuing to improve the game, and super grateful to them for carrying that forward. But the focus for us as a company is on getting the next product going and trying to learn from the experience that we had on this last game. And what we're very consciously trying to do is take a focused game mode, like really kind of a single aspect of the game, and polish that, innovate in that area, and use that focus to make sure that we do hit player expectation. And in terms of submersible elements, things that AAA games do that maybe aren't as critical, I would probably argue that the overall surface area of a StarCraft is important. If you look at StarCraft, it kind of falls into 4 different categories of players today. Those are the competitive players who, mostly play 1v1, but you can play larger format multiplayer modes. There are co-op players. Co-op was a new mode that we added later on. But so instead of fighting against each other, you're fighting together against a computer enemy. And Then there are the story players or campaign players. And then last but not least, StarCraft has this thing called Arcade, which is user generated content. Each one of those is sort of a discrete player segment. And there's overlap, like, players try all the modes, but some people tend to gravitate towards one of the other modes. So having that surface area, um, super helpful, and I think contributed to the success of StarCraft. But for any title, it's okay to do less and just consciously pick some of those. And I think what we've seen from other games that have done less but still succeeded is that story is the most important mode for most players. And then that competitive is the stickiest mode, like players stick around for the longest. So I think those two are probably the right things, at least for an RTS game, to focus on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess you could also argue there's a lot of overlap in assets created for both and, less, kinda infrastructure build, yeah. Great, Tim, and, I would say it takes a lot of resilience to publicly admit that, the first attempt didn't hit the mark, and I know that you're still very invested in RTS as the genre, but I know that some of the bigger studios are writing it off as maybe too small or not as easy to monetize as other genres. So yeah, I'm just curious on your end, why do you believe RTS still has that bright future, and maybe how might it need to evolve to really thrive from a business perspective?
Games as an industry suffers a lot from recency bias. That from a business perspective, everybody gravitates towards the thing that's working right now. And, we certainly saw that happen with MOBAs. We saw it happen with Battle Royale games. We saw it happen with team shooters. And there's a tendency to think that the stuff that came before is just done. Um, but having seen from the inside what the numbers looked like on Command and Conquer, what the numbers looked like on StarCraft and Warcraft, there absolutely is still an audience out there that's excited about these kinds of games. And it's cool to see genres have resurgences. I think we're going to see a resurgence for space sims, probably, which is something that existed as in a genre, fell out of favor, and I believe is going to be coming back. So, I think the potential exists for a new RTS to come out and really energize the market and become important again. And if that happens, it will motivate others to make more RTS games. But the audience is definitely out there. Just hitting that, point of being comparable to Age of Empires, StarCraft, Command and Conquer, the greats, hitting that point of being comparable and then going further is going to take a tremendous development effort from somebody.
It's a great point on just the cycles that go through with gaming, and there's always that potential for resurgence. And I was actually, just earlier today, and I was eating my previous round of empanadas, talking with Adam, the founder of Gamesite that helps studios with marketing, and he was just walking me through like a perfect example of action RPGs. Kind of after Diablo 2, there was that void for a couple years, and Path of Exile was able to slot themselves in it and was very successful and had a huge exit because of that. And yeah, I'm a little bit biased, but I'm rooting for the RTS resurgence.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I'm not sure who will be the one to spark that. I think there are a number of teams passionate about the space, and I like whoever it is, I'll be excited to see it happen. But certainly, the group of folks who have come together at Frost Giant are very passionate about trying to help push that forward. So
So you were sharing with this with me before. I'd love for you to share the story about the final boss, about how you were when you were first applying to Blizzard, and what was it like to work at a studio as huge and renowned as Blizzard?
yeah, Blizzard is one of the best experiences that I've had over the course of my career. I have never seen a company that big operate from a player first perspective before, and really the company changed a lot while I was there, and subsequently got acquired by Microsoft. So lots has changed there. I'm not sure what it's like today, but definitely one of my favorite experiences from the course of my career. And I, as we touched on earlier, was just a fan of Blizzard games. I was actually working on God of War at Sony at the time that the opportunity at Blizzard came up. And so I was working with a great team on a great game. I wasn't looking to go someplace else, but there was this sort of once in a career opportunity where the leadership team from StarCraft was moving over to another game, to Heroes of the Storm, and so they needed some new leadership to come in, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity as a Blizzard fan, and particularly as a StarCraft fan, to see if maybe I could be the person to do that. And so Blizzard, at that point in time, did a very comprehensive set of interviews. It was like 2 days with so many people. I can't even remember how many. Just interview after interview all day. And at the end of all that, there's kind of a boss battle, which was being interviewed by one of the Blizzard founders. And the founder who interviewed me was Frank Pierce. He can be a fairly intimidating guy. And so he had just finished telling me that he felt that World of Warcraft was Blizzard's greatest accomplishment. And I certainly respect that. WoW is a great game. And just the scope of production on that game is mind blowing. But the next question he asked me was, "Are you a WoW player?" And it was very clear that the right answer to this question should be yes. But I am not a WoW player. And in my head, I'm thinking, "Oh boy, here we go. This is where I lose this opportunity." And so, I'm not going to BS the founder. I told him I'm not a WoW player, but I also shared the reason, and there really is a conscious reason why I'm not a WoW player, which is that as a gamer, I tend to be a completionist, which means I like to play all of the available content in a game. I'll spend thousands of hours in a single game. And WoW is just so huge and continues to grow expansion to expansion that being a completionist is just kind of impossible in that world. I would disappear from real world life if I were going to try to be a completionist player in WoW. So I've never dived in because of that. And anyway, I figured whatever the reason, saying that I was not a WoW player was the wrong answer to that question. But I guess he was okay with that answer because they did give me the opportunity, and really loved my time there.
Something worked. It's a good thing. I can speak from experience of, like, at least a year or 2 of my life being in full-on completionist mode, that it is a full, 18-hour a day job.
Yeah, I have friends who have disappeared into WoW for long stretches of time. But I, also know people who met their spouse in WoW and made lifelong friendships. So there's an upside to that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely miss the in-person side of, like, being able to go to the midnight releases at GameSpot or BlizzCon, like that in-person community of, from the gaming community. I think post-pandemic, uh, changed a lot of aspects about the world, but one of them being just how increasingly digitized the gaming community is, and no longer kind of having those opportunities to meet up as much.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Like, I guess BlizzCon is coming back, so maybe some of that'll rekindle. But it is true. I think it's much more global, spread out these days. Gamescom is another fun one. There's a big conference that happens in Cologne, Germany, in August every year. That brings a lot of gamers together.
Yeah, my chief growth officer, Rob, he goes to that every year. He's a big Gamescom guy, so I might make it out there this year too.
Yeah, it's like 300,000 plus people, so it's a big turnout.
Amazing, Tim. And you got a few former Blizzard vets on the current Frost Giant team. I'm just curious, what was it like shifting from such a big team infrastructure to more of the scrappy startup mode? And did you have to unlearn any of the big company habits when founding Frost Giant?
Yeah, I think just in terms of adjustment, the biggest thing that stands out going from big company to small company is losing the benefit of all of the support departments. I mean, Blizzard had a cinematics team, QA team, a BattleNet team, had analytics and player insights and marketing, publish it. Like just the number of support departments that are there is massive, and it really um, requires a lot of conscious effort to replace those, mostly by finding external partners who can fill those roles, but sometimes building some of those capabilities inside. It's a distraction. Having those support departments in place means you can just focus on the task at hand, making the best product possible. When you've got to deal with replacing those or building those, that's all a distraction. But I think in terms of things we had to unlearn, um, probably the biggest thing is just that a lot of the team members who come out of big companies are used to being in an environment where it's okay for schedules to push because the resources are there at a big company to fall back to a new release date or to add time when necessary. A startup, your runway is your runway, and you got to make that work. And so I think certainly, particularly early on, that sense of fear of running out of runway wasn't as strong with much of the team as it would be with a team that just came out of being in startups. And by the end, I think that certainly got hammered into everybody, but you lose velocity at the beginning just because of where people are coming from.
Yeah, what you said at the beginning about the reliance and other support departments, that really resonates with me and my company. We're recruiting talent from very large BPOs, and even though it's a totally different industry, same thing. Like they're used to having a fully dedicated QA and training department, whereas us, we're more of a people wearing multiple hats, and we've built our systems over time. But especially in the early days, it was very much like, yeah, we're in startup mode. Let's just roll up our sleeves and figure it out ourselves, and how we can make do with less resources. But I found in many senses it just made us a lot more effective and agile as a team versus like the large BPOs of the world.
Totally. Yeah. And that ability to pivot quickly and just move fast when you need to is one of the best things about a startup. No bureaucratic overhead. But yeah, pros and cons for sure.
And I'd love to just hear, what's the ideal scenario for Frost Giant? Um, do you think, I just would love to check in on what that does that outlook look like? And do you see RTS genre really like rising back to the mainstream popularity with the right innovations in place?
Yeah. So for Frost Giant, I am out there trying to get the next game financed and actually going to be going to the DICE conference in a couple of weeks in Las Vegas, which is a big conference for business development and games. But where the first game was what I would call medium-sized budget, like it wasn't AAA budget, but it also wasn't single A budget. It's what we would consider a double A budget. As I mentioned, due to the crowding of the market, like most games are being pushed down into this like single A, triple I, is what we would call it in the industry, but lower budget tier. It's roughly a tenth of what we spent on the last one, which is itself a fraction of what a triple A game would cost. So we're significantly having to cut costs because that's just the market right now, and all of those things I talked about in terms of leveraging lower labor cost regions, in terms of being more bounded in scope, will apply to us. I think we have a really clear, sort of focused idea of what we want to do, and based on some comparable titles, I believe that idea has the potential to really resonate with an audience, particularly taking advantage of all the technology that we built and all the learnings that we carry forward from the last project experience. But yeah, it's a tough market right now. Like, can I get it financed? That's the question.
So I'm really curious about what the fundraising journey looks like for game studios. I'm much more familiar with like the tech startup side of pitching to VCs, but yeah, can you maybe share any for early on game studio founders that are listening, any best practices that you would share from a fundraising standpoint?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because I, in a past life, had tried to raise venture for a game studio, different company, and at that point in time, venture capital took a pretty dim view on the games industry because it's perceived as hits driven, and it certainly is hits driven. Um, but I would argue that venture capital itself, by nature, is hits driven. The business model of most venture capital funds is that they're going to place a lot of investments that they don't expect to succeed. Obviously, on an investment by investment basis, they want everything to succeed, but they go in knowing that a small fraction is actually going to succeed. And that small fraction that does succeed pays for all the stuff that doesn't, and hopefully then some, because they're looking for the unicorns, for the Googles, the Facebooks, whatever. So that's the definition of a hit driven business, right? And that's the games business, that a small fraction of games that launch actually succeed. So there was, a little bit of willingness in the early days for venture capital funds to look at games, but there was one investor in particular, Mitch Lasky at Benchmark, who came from the games industry and had the perspective to really make smart investments. And he was in things like Riot, for example, in the early days, or That Game Company, some studios that have made really great games. And I think his success was instrumental in getting other VCs to consider supporting games content, which again previously had been considered uninvestable by VCs because it was too hits driven. So there was this boom in sort of 2019, 2020, where dedicated funds for games were starting to spin up, and there was a whole ecosystem around that. Frost Giant was fortunate, and this is just alignment and timing, like nothing intentional about this on my part. I genuinely was just lucky, but Frost Giant was fortunate to be starting up at that time. And through the pandemic, there was a particular lift on the games industry, because if you think about it, people being stuck at home, what are you going to do? Playing games was one of the things that really surged during the pandemic. And that led to an increase in investment from that ecosystem that I mentioned had just spun up right before the pandemic. So, fast forward to today, unfortunately, there's been an industry-wide post-pandemic correction in the games industry. Like, too much exuberance came out of those great numbers from the pandemic, and interest rates have gone up, so the cost of capital is higher. All of that has led to a pullback. So there just is not as much venture capital investment happening in games right now, and we've seen a lot of the generalist funds who were not dedicated to this industry move on to AI and other things and basically stop investing in games. So there is still venture capital available, mostly focused on seed stage, so like the very early stage of startups for games, or growth stage, the much later period where revenue is happening and there's a good revenue story, but adding more capital can fuel growth. But everything in between, frankly, is pretty dead from a venture capital perspective for games. And the result is that project financing, so typically from game publishers, is the more prevalent way of getting games financed right now. Even there, I think there are still challenges, just the overcrowded market that we talked about, that post-pandemic correction is having a lot of impact on the biggest companies in the industry. And, we've seen kind of conservatism and even some layoffs and contraction at Microsoft, Riot, even Amazon, Ubisoft recently. So anyhow, challenging time, but I think the opportunities right now are more on the publisher finance side than on the venture capital side. Sorry if that was a long answer.
Makes sense though. Yeah, we're entering or we've been in for a couple of years, the post-pandemic correction in the gaming space, but that makes total sense. Well, Tim, this is a question I'd like to wrap up with for everyone that comes on. What's one strongly held belief that you have that you think 99% of other founders would disagree with?
Founders, by definition, are optimists. And so, we're all convinced that just persevering is going to lead to success. And I certainly also fall into that category, but yeah, I do have a contrarian perspective on whether persevering is always the right choice. I think for me, as we move into this second game, we're making a very conscious choice to pivot and to try to learn from the experience that we just had. It took a lot to let go of, we have uh, so much more that we believe we can do to make the first game succeed. We're still doing things to improve it, but we have to accept that that first game did what it did in the marketplace, and it's unlikely that any change that we make to that game is going to really have a significant change on the course for that game's future. Very much want to continue to support the audience that we did find there, but we have to let go of that idea that's been ingrained in us by every movie that you've ever seen about just hang in there against all odds. It's like sometimes you've got to acknowledge that it's time to move on to the next thing. And for us, I very much hope that that next thing is uh, this game idea that I'm out there trying to get financed right now. But yeah, that's maybe one of the harder lessons about entrepreneurialism is that not everything will succeed. Sometimes you have to try something else.
Learning to fail fast. I made that mistake with my first business of holding on for too long, but it's always a really important learning of like what you can apply to the next project. Awesome. Well, Tim, where can people find out more about you and more about Frost Giant online?
Yeah, in terms of me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's sort of my one social platform. And Frost Giant has a fairly active Discord for Stormgate, and we also have a dedicated webpage at playstormgate.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much for coming on and grabbing some empanadas with me and wishing you the very best with the current fundraising and excited to see the next RTS.
Thanks so much for having me and for the empanadas, which were delicious.
Amazing.